One of my favorite things about Shred Show is the access that it gives me to interesting people who do exciting things, and I want to share that access. Mark Price is the CEO of Firewire, and he agreed to be my guinea pig for this long-form interview experiment, and just like any experiment, there were speed bumps along the way. Yes, one of the cameras is out of focus, and yes, I had to edit our hour-long conversation down to a digestible length, but we got into some very exciting things, like Kelly Slater's investment in Firewire, what Kelly Slater is like to work with, who he really is. We get into how to surf vibrantly and healthily into your 50s and beyond, as well as Firewire's success over just the last 10 years, who the most successful Firewire board designer is, and much more stuff. If you just want the audio version of this episode, you can find it in the link beneath this video on YouTube, and I will leave it at that and let you wax a board or clean the house or go for a run while you enjoy my conversation with Mark Price. The first thing I want to bring up is you've had a career that would make a ton of surfers just salivate at the mouth. You've been professional surfer, you've been director of US marketing at Rip Curl, VP global marketing at Reef, currently CEO of Firewire. When you look at those 4 different seasons of your career, which one has been the most fulfilling? Which one's made you the most happy?
Well, that's an easy question. I mean, I've certainly enjoyed everything I've done, and there was also 12 years at Gotcha at the 80s, during the 80s, but Firewire by a landslide.
Why is that? What is it?
Well, I'm a surfer, and I think to have your career around a product that you use every day so passionately is just, there's nothing like it.
So you've got a Slater board here sitting next to you. A lot of us look at Firewire right now, and we think Kelly Slater. We see a lot of boards in the lineup, Firewire, Slater, all the boards that you make. We see worldwide distribution. Firewire looks like it's in this massively successful place. But in your path to getting here, did you ever have like an Elon Musk moment? For example, there was a moment where he thought he might lose Tesla. He thought he might lose SpaceX. Was there ever a moment that felt enormously challenging for you over the past years where you wondered, like, maybe this vision I have for Firewire isn't going to work?
Oh, many times. When I joined the company, all we had was a technology which Bert Berger had developed, the capability of building about 10 a week, no infrastructure, no supply chain, nothing, so it was a challenge from day one.
So you were very much a startup.
We were a total startup. And then even along the way, as the company grew, we had situations where we weren't sure if we'd make payroll. It was that, close to the bone at times, and it was gnarly.
What did you draw on to get you through those moments? Like when you don't think you're going to make payroll, for example. Like what did you draw on inside of you that allowed you to get through that or tap into your inner resources to get past those things? How did you face those problems with resourcefulness?
Well, I think fortunately, I joined Firewire about 10 years ago, so I was in my mid-40s, so I had some experience to draw on. I think if I was in my early 20s going through that, I probably would have freaked out and jumped out of a building. So I had experience, so that helped. And at the same time, all of us, and it's not just myself, because everyone stuck with the company, nobody quit. We believed in the product. We knew that the boards worked insanely well. And I think that's what kept us on the mission, because we just knew we had something special.
Moving forward now to today, receiving Kelly's involvement must be hugely exciting for you and everyone who stuck with this thing from day one. Can you take me to the moment where the thought first arose in your head, like, what if we had Kelly at Firewire? How did that thought first come up, and when did that happen? Where were you?
Well, unfortunately, our 2 largest shareholders went bankrupt shortly after the global financial crisis for reasons completely unrelated to Firewire. So we had to find a home for their shares.
Sounds pretty inconvenient.
Yeah, it was a major disruption to our business, and it took many, many years to find a home for those shares. And I had conversations with all kinds of people, and some of those would have been disastrous if they'd come to fruition. But we had to find a home. It was not an option. Their estates were in liquidation, and the shares had to be sold to somebody. And I had been put in touch with various people who were interested in the space, and one of them were Kelly and his group of investors, and I reached out to them, and we started the process. And it started gaining momentum and looked like it was going to happen. But the way these deals go, up until it's signed and delivered, anything can derail it. So we were obviously super excited because, I mean, come on, what could be better than having Kelly involved in our business? But in some respects, it made us even more scared, because if that fell over and he walked away, boy, that would be the ultimate letdown. So I never really allowed myself to get stoked, because I just always had this doomsday scenario where we get right up to the goal line and the whole thing falls apart for various reasons. And so it wasn't until the final deal memorandum was actually signed that I relaxed and realized, hey, it's on. And that happened on Christmas Eve at about 10 o'clock at night.
Okay,
if you can believe that.
So pause that thought for just a second. I want everyone who's watching to grasp this. When you're trying to find a home for those shares, effectively you're trying to find someone to invest in the company. So you're going around saying, we need someone to sell these shares to.
And you're talking about a majority stake in the company and in a surfboard company, which is not the kind of business that the average investor is interested in. It's a very unique space.
So come back to Christmas Eve now.
Yeah.
And the paperwork gets signed. Like, bring me to that moment where you're going like, holy living fuck. Like, Kelly Slater is now in the FireWire brand. What did that feel like? I mean, does a feeling go through your body? I mean, you'd been in the company, 9-10 years at that point. Now Kelly Slater is a part of FireWire. Like, what goes through your body? Like, what goes through your mind?
It was a range of emotions. One being incredible relief that all that negotiation, it was a 3-year process with different people, including Kelly. It took quite some time. So just to have that monkey off my back personally was huge. But I think larger than that, it was just a validation of everything that we had worked for, because everyone at this company has gone to hell and back over that 10-year period. The original management team from day one is still together today. Not a single employee left the company. Now, obviously, we've had some changes in staff for various reasons, but no one left of their own volition for a quote-unquote better opportunity. So I just felt so good for myself, of course, but also for everyone who'd put so much into the company over the years, that this was major, man. And I knew that from an industry perspective and from a consumer perspective, it would take FireWire to the next level. There's just no question about it, and it has.
For anyone who is a big fan of Kelly's surfing, but obviously hasn't had the opportunity to get to know him personally, what's something that he has said or done since you guys have begun working together, or an experience that you've had with him that you can share with us that might make the average surfer go like, whoa, like he's like that, or he says that, or he acts like this? Any experience you can share with us that has surprised you personally?
I think people have an inkling of this, and he's deep. I mean, the guy is analytical. He thinks. He's incredibly intelligent. He's deep. I mean, when you're talking to him, you need to pay attention because he sure as hell is.
Okay.
And the other thing too is he doesn't seem to make snap judgments. Like we'll have a conversation about something, and I can see him. He's obviously listening. He'll ask a few questions and stuff, and sometimes I'll come away from the meeting going, okay, well, I wonder, what his position is. And then the next day, he'll come back and say, hey, so what about this? What about that? And you'll work through it, and you can see that he's spent a considerable amount of time thinking about it, and in a 360-degree way. So that was really impressive to me, just how smart the guy is, man. I mean, he's really, really sharp.
As fun as it would be to talk about Kelly for the entire conversation, I want to move into surfboards.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things about FireWire is you don't seem to be scared of taking risks from a shape perspective. So the Vanguard, the Cornice, the Double Agent, one of my favorites, the Sweet Potato. All these shapes are uncommon and they're not mainstream, and you just go test them publicly like that with the market, when a lot of brands wouldn't. As the person who steers this ship, what gives you the courage, or is it the craziness and insanity, to continuously test shapes like that publicly?
I think it's more to do with the actual DNA of our company. I think one of the things that separates us from almost every one of our competitors is our business is not built around an individual. We aren't, Lost is obviously built around Matt Biolos' personality and abilities. Al Merrick CI was shaped around that. You got DH, JS, Pizel. Whereas for us, we're more of a technology platform, and we're open source. If someone comes to us with something that looks interesting, we'll give it a shot. So I think we just have a more open-minded approach because we're not personally vested in the shape. Of course, the company is, and there's risks associated with that. I get that, and I think we have taken risks, and we're proud of that. Some have succeeded, some not so much. But I think it's deeper than that. I think it comes down to the DNA of the company, where we're not tied to the view of a particular individual. And I think that frees us up to be much more experimental in how we go to market.
When you look back at all the decisions that you've made, bringing FireWire up to the present, consider your original vision for bringing Daniel Thompson into FireWire and your decision to move forward with that, bringing Daniel's shapes in. Is that one of the best decisions you've made for the FireWire brand? And is that the best decision Daniel's ever made as well? Because from the outside looking in, it looks like that may have been one of the singular tipping points in a positive direction that's been responsible for a lot of your success currently.
Well, I think, and I'm not putting it on the same level necessarily as Kelly's investment, I think it was definitely a big step up. We were having success prior to that. I mean, the stuff that Dan Mann was designing prior to that on more of a groveler type design, the sweet potatoes and baked potatoes and dominators and stuff, were hugely successful. So I think we had momentum and we had a market position. But Tomo was real avant-garde, and I think it opened up the market's mind as to what a surfboard could look like. And I think it also cemented FireWire's DNA as being an alternative company, period. Because Daniel doesn't just play with alternative materials. I mean, he's playing with alternative shapes to a pretty radical degree. So I think it was a really good synergy between what he stands for and what we stood for at the time.
Can you comment at all? I know that the Slater boards are selling very well right now. Yeah. Who is the most successful FireWire shape designer to date? Do you guys ever make that public? What shaper's designing the bulk of your sales?
Well, we do. We run reports all the time. We look at our business by individual model and by region, and also by our various designers. And because two of the three Slater designs were developed in conjunction with Tomo and Kelly, and then obviously you have the success of the Tomo brand in of itself. Daniel is contributing a higher percentage of our sales than any of our other designers. But the Pizel stuff is strong. Dan Mann is certainly holding his own. And then, Rob Machado has been an incredible new addition to the program. People, I think, associate him with just surfing, whereas he's been designing and shaping his boards for years, and his designs are insane.
I'd like your thoughts on something that's a little bit of a switch of gears. There's a fascinating character named Mark Andreessen, one of the most influential and dominant technology investors on the planet. And he gives this fascinating conversation about how Silicon Valley back in the 90s didn't really function as well as it could because a lot of technologists would create these wonderful products, and then investors would bring in this CEO from, say, a consumer products company like Pepsi to really blow up the company. But inevitably the company would fail because that new CEO didn't have the technology in their DNA. He contrasts that with the Silicon Valley of today, and he says, look, the reason so many of these companies like Facebook are successful is because the technologists that founded them are still running the company, right? It's in their DNA. Yeah. For example, Steve Jobs, in the early 2000s with Apple. From your experience, to what extent can you look at the problems or the hurdles that the major players in the surf industry have faced over, say, the last 5 years? And to what extent can you attribute that to either management or ownership not having surfing in their DNA or not being surfers?
Whew, talk about a loaded question, man.
Yeah. You can take that in whatever.
I thought we were going to talk about Tomo and Dan Mann. And
now I'm getting heavy on you.
Well, I think the answer is a little bit more nuanced than this, black or white, hey, you got to have a surfer at the helm or not. I think that the problem ultimately was one of scale and public companies. And I think that's what did in our industry more than who was actually at the helm. But they are linked, because as our companies grew and decided to go public, in certain cases, they felt that they needed that outside executive experience because they were now a public company, and those are run far differently to private companies, and most of the individuals, the endemic individuals, didn't have public company experience. So I think that's how a lot of outside industry people came into the industry, was it was based around the issue of companies going public. And I think the fact that they were public had a lot more to do with what happened to our industry than who was actually running the company. Because by definition, with public companies, you're chasing compounded growth quarter on quarter, let alone year on year.
And the people who own them aren't surfers.
No, and you're also going into markets and distribution channels where you're up against different businesses and going after different types of consumers that aren't, endemic to your brand. And I think that's where we lost our way. So it's sort of it's a bit of a chicken egg thing. I mean, by going public, you brought in outside executives, but if you hadn't gone public, you probably wouldn't have needed them. And I think both those two things working together created a mess. I would argue that the global financial crisis just accelerated something that was going to come anyway to our industry and made it a lot worse.
So you've been at Gotcha, you've been at Reef, you've been at Rip Curl. If you look at people out there now who are starting some of the very compelling brands that tell an interesting story, is it a good rule of thumb, like, hey guys, put it in your playbook, never go public? I mean, does that solve 80% of the potential problems?
Well, it depends what your goals are. A hell of a lot of money was made at those companies by going public along the way, and people who are smart held on to large chunks of it. So I think you've got to come back to, what are you looking for? Are you looking to build a business for the next 50 years or the next 5 years or whatever point in between? And then your strategy has to flow from that. Because going public as a strategy is very effective if you have certain goals. If you have different goals, it can be the death of you.
Switching gears again, Scott Bass reported on his podcast this month about a conversation that happened between Morris Cole and the WSL. And effectively, Morris Cole was like, hey, WSL, you guys should be forcing competitors to surf recyclable surfboards. And allegedly, the WSL got back to Morris and was like, hey, Morris, actually, we're considering this. The other piece of the story is that Morris suggested that Sustainable Surf act as a sort of independent governing body that regulates the materials that go into competitors' surfboards, kind of similarly, in my understanding, to the way that a state athletic commission might regulate the health of mixed martial artists who fight in the UFC, for example. Can you think, for example, set Kelly, set Sally, set Michelle off to the side for a second, and look at everyone else who competes on the WSL right now. What objections would they have to surfing boards made from more sustainable, recyclable materials? And are any of those objections valid in your mind?
Look, I mean, I'm not one of the world's best surfers, so I can make a statement that may not be true, because if I surfed at that level, I might think differently. I'm open to that possibility, But knowing what I know and the time I've spent in the industry and the people I've been around, I think a lot of it is disinformation. And I think there's a lot of information out there that's not accurate. I think a lot of it is fed to the industry and the public by the polyester PU board builders, because that is the business model they stuck in for the points that I just made. They don't. It's not so much that they don't want to change, but it's going to be difficult for them to change. They're going to have to retool production processes, raise their cost of goods, blah blah blah. But I hear these things like EPS boards can't handle the chop, and then I see Michelle go out an 8-foot Margaret River with a howling crosswind and win the event.
So you mentioned the other companies who are making predominantly PU poly boards. Assume that you walk into a bar, and in that bar is the 500 or 600 other surfboard manufacturers on Earth. How do those folks receive you? How do they receive you? What do they think of Firewire? What kind of message do you get from them? Do you have fans in those people? Are they frustrated by Firewire's existence on the planet? I mean, what do you get from other surfboard builders?
Well, the ones that I know, and interact with, at least to my face, we were on great terms. I mean, when we were doing the collabs with Lost, Biolis and I got along like a house on fire. John Parzell's still involved in our business. When I run into Scott Anderson, we always have a chat. There's no bad vibe. But look, beneath the surface, I mean, obviously we've had success in the market, and I think it's somewhat of a zero-sum game. If someone is succeeding, it's probably coming from someone else's business. And there's no question, that we've hurt some companies through competition in the marketplace, and I understand that. So I would say it's probably a mixed bag depending on how their business has been impacted or not by Firewire.
So some people might buy you a drink in that bar. Other people might throw a drink in your face. Split reactions all around.
Yeah, I think so. And look, I think that I think Firewire gets a bad rap in the sense that, look, we build our boards at our own factory in Thailand. We make no bones about that. Every board says that on the board, under the lamination, not a sticker. So we're not trying to hide who we are. But at the same time, no matter where we are building our boards, if we had come into the market with a PU center stringer board, just with different shapes and different team riders, we would not have succeeded. So I think sometimes Firewire gets blamed for a whole bunch of things, and the issues are much deeper than that.
So you mentioned a zero-sum game. It's a fascinating way to describe the market, because really, if you think about it, you can only sell a surfboard within 40 miles of the ocean in a first world democracy. Really, I mean, that's where the market is. It's hard to grow that market.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's a fair statement.
And what I do at Shred Show is very close to retail, because so many of the people who watch my videos are doing it because they're excited by the boards that they're seeing in surf shops. And in my view, it seems like if you want to be successful as a surf shop, you've got to own the land that your shop sits on. You've got to own the building that your shop is in. You've got to sell a ton of clothing, GoPros, and Nixon watches to offset the small margins in selling surfboards. So what are some of the things that you've done to make selling Firewire boards a more lucrative endeavor for surf shops? What are some of the things you've done to make it easier for surf shops to devote floor space to surfboards?
Okay, well, I'm going to get to that in a moment. I'm not going to sidestep that question. But coming back to your analogy about surf shops, I think what surfers need to realize is surf shops are under assault. If you look at the retail landscape today, and this is across most product categories, almost every product is available at every level of distribution and almost every channel. You can buy apparel at surf shops, sporting goods stores, department stores, chain stores, online direct from manufacturers, discount sites online, Costco, I mean, You name it.
I buy everything on Amazon.
Amazon too. So, surf shops are under assault. There's not a lot of products that they can sell that are unique to their store. Surfboards, boards, and surf-related hard goods are one of the few product categories that, by and large, most consumers will go into a surf shop and buy it today. There are surfboards sold online, but by far the majority of surfboards are still sold in a surf shop. So it's become a very, very important category for surf shops in order to survive. And if you look at the surf shops that did the best coming through the global financial crisis, it was the ones that had a strong hard goods presence. Now, at the same time, the market's overtraded. There's way too many products versus the floor space to sell them on in every category. There's way too many footwear companies, apparel companies, eyewear companies, given the amount of floor space that's available to sell those products. So surf shops, while they're under assault in terms of the competitive landscape across retail, at the same time, their floor space is a premium for brands who want to get in there. So most products that are in surf shops enjoy some level of inventory support from the manufacturer.
Meaning, for people who are watching, like the manufacturer, the surf shop isn't just buying X t-shirts from the manufacturer. Right. The company is helping the surf shop carry the clothing in some type of creative way.
Yeah, and that could be any number of ways. So for example, it could be, hey, the invoice is net 30, but we know that you're not going to pay in 75 or 90 days, and we're cool with that. We're not going to charge you interest, we're not going to send you to collections, whatever, Yeah. At the same time, at the end of the season, if that product didn't sell and now we want to give you more product, we're going to take that stuff back. Just credit you and freshen up your store, and we'll figure out what to do with it. Mm-hmm. Or in a bigger brand's case where we have a shop concept in your store, we're going to make sure that square footage has a certain minimum profitability for your store, so you're covered. There's any number of ways you can do it. Okay. I know there's a number of PU brands out there that are constantly trading out older yellowed PU boards because PU boards tend to go yellow over time, and then they end up disposing of those boards however they see fit. Look, we give our retailers a tremendous amount of inventory support. That's a fact. But my point is that any company that has a significant presence in a surf shop, whatever product category they're in, including our PU competitors, are doing the same thing in different ways. So that's just the reality of doing business today in surf shops. And on the flip side, we have this bigger footprint, and people will turn around and say, well, that footprint's that way because you're giving them so much inventory support. And that may be true, but at the same time, if the product's not turning, nobody's making money. The retailer's not making money, and neither are we. So our boards are selling. That's ultimately why we have that level of support. Retailers are not in it to support Firewire. They're in it to support their families and their employees and go on surf trips and obviously set up their retirement. That's why they're in business. And that floor space has to generate a certain return on the investment made in it.
I see.
So, as I said, if we didn't perform for them, they'd throw us out tomorrow.
Okay. So it's time for a really fun question.
Oh, please.
This might be too early to get your comment on, but I want your comment on it. Again, drawing back to the fact that the surfboard industry is kind of a zero-sum game, maybe. There's very interesting stuff going on with the Kelly Slater Wave Co.
Yeah.
If I just telescope out looking 5-10 years into the future, who knows how many wave pools there are going to be in the United States and all over the world. How do you view Firewire's possible involvement in the retail opportunities that may arise with the Kelly Slater Wave Co? Because it seems like if these wave pools catch on and you have this investment from Kelly, it seems like, Firewire branded retail possibly at the wave pool locations?
Let me just come back to the zero-sum game thing. It's not entirely true. Look, surf schools are blowing up around the world and new participants are coming in, but it is a real tough sport to stick with through your whole life, and people drop off. So generally speaking, the pool of surfers is not growing exponentially, but I don't want to create the impression that there aren't new people coming into the sport. Just a point of clarification. Okay. On the Kelly Slater Wave Company, look, I think that it remains to be seen how ubiquitous wave pools become, but clearly they're going to create new market opportunities for everyone in the industry, not just surfboard companies. And it's going to benefit our business, but I think it's going to benefit our competitors as well. Because coming back to that experiential retail, part of experiential retail, in my view, is having a selection of brands for the consumer to look at. And these sort of very narrow vertical stores, I think, are a tough sell. In the super high fashion side of the business, yeah, they can succeed. But I think for everything else, you need to have selection. So I see it creating opportunities for all of the surfboard companies.
It's like a rising tide lifts all ships kind of a situation.
Yeah. And I would argue that if I could choose, let's say we had Kelly's Wave, and if we could choose between a store at that Wave that carried CI and Lost and JS and Firewire and Parzel versus just Firewire, I would rather be in the store that carried those other brands as well, because I think they're going to have the foot traffic, and it's just a better environment for someone to buy surfboards in.
So before we start tapering down with some rapid fire questions, I want to throw at you another fun one. You just said surfing is a little bit unique because a lot of people do fall off and stop surfing. You haven't. You're this young, vibrant dude, despite how long you've been alive. Yeah. You still surf a lot. Yeah. Still very excited to go surfing. You don't get tired of small waves or wind-blown waves.
You seem like you just need better boards. That's all.
So is that it? Like, how have you stayed this excited about surfing, and how have you continuously surfed day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out for as long as you've been alive? And why have your peers fallen off or maybe left the sport or only surf a couple times a month now? What's your kind of secret to that longevity, having such a vibrant relationship with surfing?
Look, I was hooked from the first time I started surfing, and I think that every single major decision in my life, the first filter that I've applied to get to the right decision for me is how it would affect my surfing.
So you go through like all the decisions in your life.
I'll give you an example. You know?
Please.
I mean, my uncle was an incredibly successful electrical engineer up in Canada. My two cousins in South Africa are both, or they're both retired now, but they were very successful electrical engineers. I used to build voltmeters with them when I was 10 years old. All I wanted to be was an electrical engineer. And I started surfing, still wanted to be an electrical engineer. Got to university, got accepted. On registration day, I started drawing up my schedule, you know, and I went, I'm never going to get to surf, man. I mean, the class schedule was nuts. On that day, without talking to anyone, I switched to a Bachelor of Commerce.
No kidding.
Like that, boom. Dropped a 10-year dream. And then went home to explain it to my dad, which didn't go so well.
Because a lot of kids today go through that.
Yeah, he flipped out, you know, which is understandable. Back then in South Africa, surfing had a real bad stigma attached to it, you know. But the point being is, you know, I've turned down business opportunities that would have taken me away from the coast, or to companies that didn't have a surf DNA in their culture. So I've just consciously limited myself, and I use that word as a positive, to a lifestyle and career choices that have kept me right on the beach.
Just to close out rapid fire, quick questions. You don't have to give quick answers though. You can expand if you want. Last time you surfed a PU poly surfboard?
Oh, that would have been George's about 8 years ago, and my buddy was out there and he wanted to try my board. So I had to catch a couple waves on his. Hated it.
Last time you surfed a non-Firewire surfboard?
That's easy. That, you know, the way Tomo and I hooked up, I saw the video of Tom Curran in the finals with Dane Reynolds at the Santa Barbara event. And I was just watching this board and I was going, man, there's something going on there. And Tom could ride anything, but there was still something going on there. And then I found out that it was a Tomo board. I thought it was some Japanese guy, you know, because Tomohiro is such a popular name in Japan. I had no idea who he was. So I tracked him down, met with him, and just expressed interest. And I said, well, look, as a starting point, build me a board, because, you know, I want to try one. And it was a non-Firewire board. It was epoxy and EPS, but it was a non-Firewire. And I loved it.
So you can give one piece of advice to yourself at 25 years old. So what are you going to go tell yourself?
Just slow down a little bit. Just a little bit.
So final question. Your cell phone is over there on the desk. Tonight, you can send a text message from that phone that's going to reach the phone of every single person on the planet. Tonight, they're going to read this text message that you send them. All 7 billion of us. What text message do you send out?
I would say that I think Mother Nature is in agony, and we need to do everything we can to lessen the pain.
On that note, I'll pitch you on a part 2 sometime. We'll see if you say yes. Now, do you want to see a part 2 of this conversation with Mark Price? And if so, what questions would you ask him? Tell me in the YouTube comments down beneath this video. And also, who else would you like to see interviewed in this type of a long form format like this? Tell me that in the YouTube comments as well. We'll see you soon on Shred Show.